Okay, we'll get started. My name is Scott Carr. I'm the room monitor for the audit track. I'd like to introduce Phil Beyer and Scott Stevens. Phil Beyer is the Information Security Officer for the Texas Education Agency, the government organization charged with managing and protecting student and educator information. He is an information security professional with more than 10 years experience in the industry. Mr. Beyer previously worked as lead consultant within his Denham Group, where he specialized in incident management, security operations, and technical compliance testing. He has extensive experience leading security assessments and has expertise creating security policy, assessing software security risk, and strengthening an information security practice. He is Education Director of the ISSA Capital of Texas chapter. Mr. Beyer has been a CISSP since 2005, holds a BS and holds a BS degree from Trinity. He's active outside the office as a martial artist. And Scott Stevens is an 18-year IT veteran with a background in application development and infrastructure tools management. Over his career, Scott has worked in every phase of the software development lifecycle, starting as an automated software assurance test developer, and then moving into and spending the bulk of his career developing software applications for internal business customers. After 13 years of software development, Scott began focusing on the business side of software development by taking on project management and business analysis roles, eventually moving into the software release manager position at Charles Schwab. As a senior consultant with the Denham Group, Scott has managed and led security remediation projects and helped build out the information security program for the Texas Education Agency. Please help me welcome Scott.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Thanks very much, Scott.
Thanks everybody for coming. So before we start, show of hands, who knows what opensamm stands for? We can explain the acronym. All right. So Software Assurance Maturity Model. That's what that stands for. It's an OWASP project. And a bit of housekeeping. I got on all the slides the lanyard site that has actually will have this slide deck afterwards, but it has a link to the opensamm site, opensamm.org, and the opensamm manual and things like that are freely available. So real quick, kind of from a background standpoint, what are we going to do, or overview standpoint? We'll talk kind of we'll set the background. I used a kind of trope, a theme here with the Pitfall game, the classic arcade game. So we'll kind of do a game manual thing, try to set the stage. We'll talk about the premise of the game, some treasures and pitfalls that you'll encounter as you implement a maturity model in software security and software assurance, and then we'll kind of talk about where we go from there once this particular game is over. Scott already did the background, so there you go. I'm Phil, that's Scott, and TEA from a background, because that is kind of a stage I'm setting here. So I'm the Information Security Officer TEA. TEA is about 700 employees right now. We work with about 1,200 school districts around the state who are our primary audience, educators and students in that space. And so that's 5 million student records now, and a lot of historical student records that we care about, right? So where did TEA start? We have an application security program. When I came in the door, I've only been in this position for 11 months. As again, another piece of background. We have some policies and procedures around this kind of thing. How mature they are, or how complex they are is an interesting question. And then we had some initial training around the group and some exposure to security concepts. When I walked in the door, application security was not completely unknown, right? So that's an important concept. If it is completely unknown in your organization, that's a different starting point than where I started from. Also, traditionally at TEA, there's a siloed approach, and so what I mean by that is a lot of different groups are doing their own thing, right? Okay, sometimes they're talking to each other, sometimes they're working together, but traditionally this is a place where development teams are doing their thing together, and the other development team is doing their thing together. That's not necessarily bad. It's just that's the state of the situation. When I walked in the door, this is not really the case anymore, because you guys may or may not know that the state's fiscal year turned over, so we lost a lot of funds. But when I walked in the door, we had outsourcing for a lot of things. So our software security was primarily an outsourced activity to both Denham Group, which Scott is a part of, and we use the Veracode tool to do a lot of our software security. These are key points about where we're starting, because you have to realize that TEA had something in place before we move into a maturity model and start growing our program. Okay, if you have nothing in place, that's a different starting point. So where can you start? And that's what I'm saying here. I'm suggesting that establishing an application security program doesn't necessarily begin with a maturity model, okay? There are a lot of other folks talking about software assurance. There's a lot of other folks talking about today about application security, software security techniques. Those are great things to know about and deal with. But getting started, okay, if you're if you haven't done this before, you got to be a little careful about taking those first few steps, and we'll try to speak to that. You do, and this is kind of step one, you have to have a champion. A lot of the folks in this room are that kind of champion, but you really do have to have somebody that can start talking this sucker up. You can't just go in the door and say, here are some software requirements. Here's our maturity model level 1, let's start doing this. You have to have somebody who can really talk about this kind of thing. I would argue eloquently gosh, I'm flubbing here on finding the word, but charismatically, right? I mean, you need somebody who can talk. You do need to make sure the whole team gets it, that the whole stack of the team. Managers and executives to some extent, right? But all the way down. Developers, testers, security folks. Not just your security folks need to get this, okay? Developers and testers. And again, a lot of folks today are talking about that kind of thing. What we really want to get into, and so that's kind of where we're getting started here, is having a roadmap. Okay, so once you get started here, you really want to have a plan moving forward, and that's where opensamm can be one of those things. Okay, another show of hands here. Who is either working through opensamm, bsim, or Microsoft's SDL? Anybody? Okay, so not half the room, maybe a third of the room or so. That's a good stage to set, because maturity model is not necessarily something you're familiar with as a whole, but that's all right. So, kind of as we get started here, I'm gonna hand it over to Scott here to talk a bit more in depth about what opensamm is to set that game manual stage.
Well, thank you very much, Phil. As with any game or anything that has structured rules, you have a manual. Pitfall told you how to use the controller, how to jump over alligators, swing on the rope. And what we did when Denham Group came in to assess the software development lifecycle at the Texas Education Agency, we did so with an eye to established standards. And our manual that we went in with Phil's agreement and support, was the opensamm standards. What Phil is talking about, needing a champion, I prefer the term paladin, because you can have an evangelist or a champion, but a paladin has the tools, the sword and the shield, to cut through whatever has to be cut through, and they have the charisma to do it. So I like to think of Phil as the paladin over at Texas Education Agency. And this, right here, the manual, this is what we're talking about.
You guys are done with the back.
Really? No, well, you know. So the manual breaks it down into 4 large business functions that relate directly to elements of the software development lifecycle: governance, construction, verification, and deployment. And you can see the cute little icons. I don't mean that derogatorily. They're really cool little icons. For governance, construction, the hammer and the wrench; verification, making sure everything works the way you think it should; and then deployment, getting it out into your operational environment.
And just to interject, you can't really see the color here, but the governance is blue, construction is kind of orange, verification is green, deployment's red. Obviously, the authors of opensamm did a fairly good job of making it ADA compliant, because you didn't really need to know that those had colors. But it's pretty. It's got some color in it.
So what we started with, the large business functions, can be broken down into the security practices. And there's 3 security practices in each of the business functions. In governance, we have strategy and metrics, policy and compliance, and then education and guidance. In construction, threat assessment, security requirements, architecture, and so on down the list. Each of these areas is an area for improvement, and using the opensamm framework, you start on a scale of 0 to 3. 3 being the most mature level of the model, 0 being we don't know anything about this particular topic. And so going into the maturity work, one of the first things that we did was look at, as an organization, the overall strengths and weaknesses in these areas across the entire application portfolio, using some tools that the opensamm project made public for their website. In this case, it was a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet with some really cool calculations. We can go into all of the questions and assertions that build that spreadsheet later on if you'd like to. It's really fascinating. But for a topic of conversation here, these are the areas that at each phase of the maturation process, you're going to find your development, your QA, your management, project managers, and your operations team working on at any given time. So, opensamm, being the forethoughtful organization that they are, put together a set of templates based on the different types of industries, or different industries. The manual, the template that we used at the Texas Education Agency was based specifically for government organizations. And it's a little bit tough to tell with the color gradation, but here you can see that it is broken down into 6 phases, and everywhere there's an intersection of the phase and the level of security discipline. That's what you work on during that phase. So for example, during the first phase, we mostly worked on governance activities, strategy metrics, policy and compliance, education and guidance. And at the end of phase 1, those 3 disciplines have gone from a 0 to 1. That means the organization has more information about that particular activity. And throughout the template, you see these things coming up in chunks where you focus on one aspect with other parts of the SDLC getting some love, so that you don't just spend all of your time working on compliance at the very beginning and nothing on construction until the end. So this is where TEA decided to start. The early levels, phase 1, phase 2, getting to know the game. Phase 2, racking up some points. You know, you're hitting some treasures. You have found opportunities for improvement using the framework. Phase 3, you're hitting your stride. You have engaged across the organization, and everybody by phase 3 knows that there's security activities going on, and by then they should know what their role in the particular assurance model is. Phase 4, bigger treasures, deeper pits. The further along you go, you have elevated awareness, and now you have a deeper understanding of the things that could hurt you. And so you have now a greater obligation to address those things across the entire organization. Yes, sir?
Are the phases to get you from, say, a level 0 to a level 1, or you see what I'm saying?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
By the end of each phase, like for example on level 1, assuming that you start at 0, by the end of level 1, you will have gone from a 0 to a 1 in strategy metrics, policy and compliance, and education and guidance. Whereas here, for example, code review, you don't even touch code review activities in phase 1. But at the end of phase 2, your organization will be at a level 1 for code review, or that particular application group.
Right.
As an additional example, in operational enablement, for instance, so when we're engaging our deployment teams, our operations teams, etc., in some of those activities, we're waiting for quite a while until the rest of our program is more mature, before we even engage them in some of those capacities. So, and as a follow-up, kind of a key point, just as we're going forward here. So, 4 business functions, 3 activities in each function, 12 things total. It really is important to take away from here that we're not working on everything right away. We really are not going to work on everything right away, and that's not just a recommendation. I would offer that's a requirement to even do this thing, okay? You will fail right at the beginning if you try to do it all at the same time, okay? And again, I think it is valid to comment that this particular template works for us, or is working for us. Everybody doesn't do it the same way, right? I mean, opensamm has its templates, but I mean, make your own. You know, I mean, well, no, I really want to do operational enablement right away because my organization already is mature. We just need to get a few ducks in a row to say we're mature, so to speak, or to report that we're mature. But if we're already doing some of those things, why not do it quicker, right? So yeah, it depends on what your organization's doing. However, the key takeaway is that no one should or can do it all at the same time right away. Okay.
That's right.
Microsoft can.
Well, but no. So that's
no.
interesting.
See?
Yeah, right.
That's
So
a common misunderstanding.
well, yeah, so that was interesting, right? I mean, no, I know. So I was sitting in Michael Howard's talk, and you might have been too, and it was really interesting to see him talk through the history of all of that, because that implementation was a rather gradual process. And I think this is the same idea, same thing, that and we'll get to it with here, that you kind of start with some governance ideas, and then you get into some meat, but you get back to some governance ideas. You really kind of hop back and forth. So, yeah.
I don't know if you're going to get to this later, but like when we implemented this, we picked 3 of the 12 objectives as our first phase, and it looks like you got 6. At least
Yes.
you're doing level 1 at.
Right. Yeah. So
How did you choose those 6 versus out of 12? Or are you going to cover that later? Or?
that's kind of actually a quick answer, and we can move on. I basically took OpenSAM's recommendation.
Okay.
OpenSAM said this for government organizations. I looked at it. It seemed reasonable based on some of the activities we were already doing. Didn't seem like it would fail, so I decided to give it a try.
Okay.
I mean, if you're doing bootstrap software, right, you're going to do a lot more code review stuff, maybe some more static analysis or that kind of stuff. Right?
So the thing to remember at the beginning of the program, of any kind of maturation process, it's not about the perfect security program at the very beginning. It's about starting with structure. Start with structure, the rest will follow.
And don't start with tools.
Don't start with tools.
I would add that. Don't start with tools.
What does that mean?
So there, a lot of folks today may be talking, I haven't been in all the talks, folks may be talking about using particular software security tools or doing this kind of testing or this or that, and mostly these days software security testing takes some sort of scanning tool. If that's what you're starting with, if that's what your program is beginning with, I don't think it's going to get very far. I think you're going to have to go back to a step 1. That's a step 2, if you will. Okay? So really, we've talked a little bit about this, but I'll say before we begin that whether you realize it or not, you're already on the road to maturity. Okay, kind of this game here has started. You may be at level 0, but the game has started because all of us have either an implicit or an explicit requirement to have secure software, and it may be implicit until you get hacked or until you have a breach. Then it's now an explicit requirement. But as long as you have sensitive data, you have a requirement to have that software secure, whether you realize it or not. Shortcuts do not exist in implementing a maturity model. Any maturity model, sorry, there are no cheat codes. There is no invincibility star for Mario, and you could go through everything. There's no God mode like in Doom. Okay, sorry. It's not going to happen. Okay, but I suppose that's obvious. And the premise for this talk is that there are things that are hard, are things that you can run into that are difficult, and we're calling them pitfalls, and there are things that are going to provide even bigger rewards. Obviously, if you move through a maturity model, there are rewards to your program because you're growing towards maturity. But I think our suggestion is that there are things that are even more rewarding, some things that are big wins at certain levels, certain areas. Okay, so let's get started moving through those things. The treasures in kind of the first phase, and we kind of did try to think just to keep track, so you didn't have to remember that nifty little roadmap template that we put up for you. This is what's going on at phase 1. You see that we're doing 3 governance things and moving them up to level 1, and we're doing 1 construction thing and 1 verification thing. So there you go. And if you don't remember what those abbreviations are for, just ask if you're curious, but basically that's the idea. Okay, so we'll kind of lay that out, so I didn't have to tell you. You can see it, and there you go. I think the biggest treasure in phase 1, when you're beginning this thing, if you can really get it done, and it's hard, is getting a map. Okay, and by that I mean a roadmap, and really what's going on here, you have a very powerful organizational tool. You now have something that, if you do it right, can be bought in at multiple levels of the organization, executive on down through, program management in your software development areas, in your teams, to your team leads, all the way through the stack. Folks realize we are going somewhere. We're not going anywhere, we're going somewhere in particular, okay? And we have a map. It's not necessarily perfect, right? You may pick a template, you may decide to start with 3 things, you may decide to start with 5 things, you may decide to start with all 12 for whatever reason, okay? And it may have been great, and it may not have been. It may succeed, it may fail, but you have a map. And that is a powerful tool. That is something that can get you where you're going. That, I think, is the biggest treasure of this whole darn thing. And I think you will see that some of the biggest treasures are at the very beginning of this process, because they'll really rocket you through that maturity, that process of moving to maturity. Now, the dangerous thing about a map is you got to use it, and if you don't, people are going to hold you to it, especially if you do get buy-in throughout the organization. Now, you're getting a little running room here too. That's kind of another treasure in the first phase. Like in the game Pitfall, it's difficult if you walk into the level and the lake is right there. And you can't like back up and try to run and practice doing your jumps at the beginning. In the early levels are always easy in these games, right? In all these platformer games, anything, the early levels are really simple. There's one little bad guy, right? One little easy obstacle to overcome. And to some extent that is the case here, okay? We'll comment in the next slide about that, but to some extent this is a situation where getting started, you've got a lot of tools available to you. There's a lot of resources, there are questionnaires, there are other things you can use to get this process moving. So those are good things.
And so with treasures, you have pitfalls. The thing to remember at the very beginning is that you'll notice there's a focus on governance at the very beginning so that people know what they should know. Now, setting up a governance structure at the beginning can be overwhelming because there may be a tendency to document too much or to try and create policies for things that haven't been fully examined yet. So setting up a governance organization or a governance infrastructure can be overwhelming at the beginning, and that's why you want to break it down into smaller chunks. Now, based on your map, that there will be pitfalls. You can't stand still. You started this, you've got to keep moving. But inertia is tough. Building up the momentum to keep a program going at the very beginning can be very difficult because now you're working with 1, 2, 3, 4 different areas of your SDLC. All across the board, you're hitting it very early. And so trying to get things moving, trying to get all those people lined up in the same direction and then moving towards a goal can be tough. Also, just determining who should play. Identifying the correct people, the correct stakeholders from each of those organizations, each of those business functions is critically important. And you have to have representation across the organization because you're going to be working on every part of the organization. So finding the right people to play is sometimes can be kind of hard, but in these organizations, if you're lucky enough to have a fairly structured organization, those people will jump out at you. The senior project managers, the senior QA team, the ISO can help organize everybody so that you're pointing in the same direction. So now that you've started, you've gotten a couple of treasures, you've hit phase 1, you understand the rules, and you've got a roadmap. So phase 2, wrapping up some points. This is where you're getting going. This is where you're actually starting to see some real improvement. You're now at the end of this phase, you have increased your maturation across every level, every business function in the organization to at least 1. Some people start at 0, some people start a little bit higher depending on the type of organization. But by the end of phase 1 and starting phase 2, you are on your way. You are picking up points. So now the development teams are starting to understand and appreciate the security problem. Awareness is starting to trickle through the organization. And this is important. Now, more of the team is involved in practicing security. Not just developers, not just one crazy guy who goes, "We can't have cross-site scripting. Don't you know how bad that is?" Now, everybody on the development team understands some of the more common things that they're supposed to be looking at. Architecture is starting to get looked at. Verification is in there. And now, you possibly found your way around an alligator pond. Instead of having to jump across all those alligators, maybe you have a way around it. Maybe now you have a rope. Maybe now you can find an underground tunnel to keep things moving along, to rack up some more points. Which brings us to the second part of phase 2, some of the pitfalls.
So the difficulty with moving through maturity model is that you start to see things you didn't see before. Okay, so some of these dangerous things you did that maybe weren't there at the beginning of the game have started to appear, and really. Now that the development team is more involved, the development maturity for threat assessment and for secure architecture, they're not just going through some of these threat modeling activities that John Stephen or somebody else is talking about. They're really seeing threats. You know, oh my gosh, there's stuff we didn't consider. Oh my gosh, our software isn't architected correctly. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And this can be a problem, right? I mean, once people realize threats are real, they can get stuck. Okay, their character can die, right? You realize that it is possible to jump and not make it correctly, right? And to hit that alligator and get bitten. And that can be a tough part. That's where that champion, that charisma is going to come into play. You got to keep people moving along. You got to keep people encouraged that this is not something you're going to get stuck in. Okay, that there's value here, that there's going to be something you'll get out of it. We also got to realize that once we start getting more of this, now these are green, right? This is all the verification stuff. Once we start to get a lot more people involved in the testing activities, whether they're actual testers or coders involved in peer review and the security team involved in design reviews and other kinds of things. It can get tough. It's like giving your game controller to this guy and that guy and this guy and that guy, and you got to trust that they're starting to play the game. Okay, you know, they're playing your own game. They're starting to rack up points for you, and so what that means is that you know, you got to be careful that you've given folks the tools to move forward correctly and to play the game correctly. They may just not play like you. Okay, they're not necessarily on your security team. Developers aren't. Project managers aren't necessarily on your security team. So once we move through some of these, yeah. What's up, Dave?
Well, you can push this question, but I work for a fairly involved when I look at any development team, you know, there are 14. They all play by different.
Certainly.
And so when I look at any of those steps, you know, I'm saying things off or whatever. Within the steps, I think like, okay, yeah, there's that one step, and in theory, I really want that one governance system. Maybe I mean I'm being 14 different iterations of governance systems, because there's a room for that. And I could in theory try to combine one, but that may not work.
I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, but there is a point here that I'd like to offer. There's a reason why we kind of move through governance at the very beginning, and we have to establish a baseline that we're all going to work towards. Okay, so like I said at the very beginning, my organization does have kind of silos throughout it. I'm not exactly sure if that's exactly what you're referring to,
Yeah.
but the
phrase and see if it helps. If you do have 14 different organizations, would you sort of split this up and do this exercise, or kind of go through this model of 14, maybe not completely 14 different ways, but dice it up rather than kind of take the entire organization?
So I'm going to suggest, now TEA it's maybe not 14, I have some other folks in the room who may know better than me, but it's not 14, okay, it's less than 10, right, kind of development teams. It's probably a handful or maybe a few more than a handful, you know, something like that. I'm going to suggest the answer is no. Okay, what was your question? The question was, do we do it piecemeal or do we do it across the board? I'm going to suggest across the board. Okay, and I think Michael Howard may agree with me in that sense, because it seems like that's what Microsoft did when they implemented SDL. It was kind of a wholesale thing. It wasn't this Windows project team over here and this team and this team. You know, it was everybody across the board, and that's what we're doing at TEA. So I can't speak for every single organization, because obviously, if you do have large logical chunks, it may make sense to go over here with this big logical chunk and do it in this gigantic division and not across the whole enterprise.
I think one thing to point out is the way opensamm is structured is it doesn't say 100% of your devs must follow this set of requirements to reach level 1. It'll say the majority of your developers should know what the requirements are, whatever they may be, at this time. So that could be one set of standards, multiple set of standards. It's really flexible in that way. It gives you a guidance of where to go, but it doesn't tell you how to do it, if that makes sense.
This is a good point, Kevin. For the sake of completeness, opensamm does have references of kind of success criteria for these maturity levels, right? So that it can be a standard that Kevin could come in and assess my organization, I could go and assess Steven's organization, or what have you, okay? And say, all right, no, you may say you're at OpenSAM level 2 here, but really you're at OpenSAM level 1, because OpenSAM says you must have 80% of the team doing such and such, right? But after you only have 75% of the team, whatever. So, you may score your organization however, but the fact is there is a standard. It is established, and whether or not you want to pay attention to the sex criteria is certainly up to you. However, those do exist, and Kevin made a good point. It's not 100%. Especially at these lower levels, the success criteria, as defined by OpenSAM version 1.0, are almost completely not 100%. They're around 80 or 50 or something like that. Those kinds of numbers at the lower levels, and they get higher as you go. Okay? So maturity doesn't mean perfection. Maturity just means a little older.
I have to go here as in my organization, we have other teams like that too. And majority of the teams have picked up some amount and signed up for a certain amount of things. It was easier to manage and track progress. And it's easier to get in and help, especially if somebody came up with something and you need to go out and help them with the education. It was easier to do it and do it together. The teams that came in later suffer because, they had a lot to catch up and nobody was really going to go back and help them one-on-one, like when they rolled out the first wave. So they suffer the ones that come later.
Yeah.
So I think that the rollout all at once really helps.
So this does get back to kind of that first pitfall we mentioned, this log idea of you enter the screen and the log is in static. Typically the log in the game Pitfall is rolling at you. And if you just stand there, it's going to hit you. Okay? So the tough part about this balkanized, siloed kind of thing, if it's 5 or 14 or 1,500 development groups, that would be crazy, but whatever. Fair enough. But the idea is, OpenSAM doesn't say phase 1 should take 5 weeks. Phase 1 could take 5 years. I don't know. It's up to your organization. However, if phase 1 is taking 5 years, you're going to get hit by that log. Right? I mean, phase, you have to develop, before you begin, realize that if you're going to start this sucker, you got to set up a situation in which you can succeed. Or else I would suggest don't start, do something else. Wait to implement a maturity model before you realize that, in phase 1, that you can't succeed, because you'll get run over. You will indeed get run over if you cannot succeed in whatever for your enterprise is not short, but is a reasonable period of time.
That's why we picked 3 instead of 6.
Great. That makes perfect sense.
3, we couldn't do 6.
There you go. That makes perfect sense. Yes, ma'am.
Any gaps in the common development process when you're trying to roll out security?
No, there weren't any gaps.
You want to take that one?
Yeah.
How did you handle that?
What we found was through the use of the survey that comes with OpenSAM, we were able to see patterns of the responses at different areas. And so one software development team may have been really, really strong on code reviews, for example, which is largely team-based at most organizations. Whereas another team, just purely based on the anecdotal responses that we got from the survey, may really have shown that they need help on security requirements. They don't have a good handle on one thing or another. And so using the questionnaire in combination with each of the activities during the maturation process, you can customize your approach to that level. So one development team may have absolutely no need at all to work on governance stuff because they have a really good internal organization. And so they say, okay, yes, we're doing this, here, we can prove it, they're done. The other teams may need to spend a lot of time on that one area. And so using the questionnaire in conjunction with the phases, you can very easily see where those gaps show up in the questionnaire and then use that to customize each of the phases for those teams. And this is especially effective for organizations with a lot of software development activities going on in different silos. Because you don't have to have the same exact things going on. You have to have consistent activities across the board with each of the teams to hit that success criteria. So yeah, gaps are identified by the software, or by the questionnaire, and then addressed by customizing each phase.
Let me answer that question in a different way. I'm going to go back to the very first treasure that we mentioned, the map. Okay, so the questionnaire that Scott mentioned is a generic OpenSAM questionnaire. You can get it from opensamm.org, et cetera, et cetera. This is what it looks like before you start. You give the questionnaire to a bunch of different people that are relevant and should know all the answers to the questions. And they go through, and for any given set of questions, there's a lot of I don't know. Okay, there's a lot of I don't know. That's what it looks like at level 0. Okay, I can speak from experience. There's a lot of I don't know, not really sure. Doesn't this other group have control over that? Or wait a minute, isn't that somebody else's responsibility? A lot of that kind of answer. Okay, if you do it right and you move through phase 1, largely the answers on the questionnaires then would be yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Not I don't know. Right? Obviously, it's not a situation where until you're at super maturity or whatever that looks like, I don't know, because we're not there yet. Until you're at super maturity, there's not a lot of yeses. But at least people know that yes, we do that, no, we don't do that. Yes, we do that, no, we don't do that. And that was the first kind of obvious thing that came back when we got started with this sucker. Oh my gosh, we have so far to go. Nobody even knows the answers to these questions. Yeah.
I think one of the things, I do this a lot, with Sam stuff.
Cool.
I think one of the things that people don't realize is that going from level 0 to level 3 is maybe, they don't understand how unrealistic that is, and yet 0 to 1 can take a significant amount of time depending on the size of your organization. I have one organization I do this with, they've got 7,000 developers. And so it's a huge effort, and the amount of time we go from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 2 is, a year or more. And so don't be afraid that the timeline might seem unrealistic in terms of so far out. I mean, you're not doing anything. This is, even going from 0 to 1.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Great. That's great feedback. So we'll keep moving along. So on phase 3, again, we're starting to move to kind of level 2s in a lot of places, which is cool. We're seeing some gold bars, a lot more visibility and confidence in the upper levels of the organization, right? So now at kind of this level 2 area of governance, those governance areas are starting to move to level 2. We're not just getting some consistent policy and consistent documentation and education across the board. We're now seeing the beginnings of real metrics, the beginnings of real reporting. Okay, so you can push some information up to management. It may not be thorough or complete or incredible or something like that, but it's something. And now that visibility can really be a big win for you as a leader of this particular activity, of maturity model implementation, or the champion of it. You're seeing some real returns. Maybe not necessarily value or something yet, but some real returns. You can see something happening, and that's whether we like it or not. Executives care about something they can see. They care about the graph or the bar or something like that. Whether we like it or not, that's the case. Now, there's also we're also getting some direction here too. So we don't just have a map. We have some real clarity that at these levels that from requirements to maintenance, there really is a formal process. Okay. Again, we don't just have a few things in place. We have some relatively mature things in place in security requirements, and there is something to add here that people don't really realize necessarily, that vulnerability management is a bigger area in OpenSAM. It includes incident response, okay, and some other kinds of things. Raphael in his talk was talking about, hey, in your security lifecycle for your applications, your application lifecycle management. Are you considering disposal of applications? Are you considering incident response? And in OpenSAM, the answer would be yes. Or at least we know we're trying to get there. We may not have a strong application incident response program or activity, but we're going to get there. With VM2 and VM3, we do have that. At least that's what we're working towards. So, there really is some strong direction in the phase 3 area.
So now that the bar is being raised across all business functions with tighter integration between some of the organizations, the development teams, maybe the QA teams, maybe management and QA, have now got a little bit tighter integration on their processes. They understand what the other group is doing more often, which raises the bar, which also means that better informed management now has higher expectations. They understand at this point what should be happening for the organization in regards to the software assurance maturity level. And when things go bad, or if there is a response that theoretically should have been handled, now management has that awareness. You have given them the tools, you've given them the branch to smack you with. You have said, I'm going to lead you to the alligators, hope I don't jump in. So that's one of the things that, it could become a problem. Now that they know what to look for, you have an obligation to keep that bar at that level that you've raised it to. Now, at this point, you're also possibly looking at a wall. Different obstacles will block your path. So instead of possibly just the low-hanging fruit, yes, we do code reviews, yes, we do design reviews. Now you have more things at a higher level with security requirements, vulnerability management. You have more things that are harder to work on. Because, no question about it, the job gets harder the higher the maturation process goes. It doesn't get easier, but you get bigger rewards across the entire organization. So now, developers and operators, and we just use operations and development because they're historically very separate. They may not enjoy working together as closely as they do now. You now have developers who have a clear understanding, thanks to operational enablement and vulnerability management. They have a better understanding of what should happen in a cleanly running operations environment. And likewise, the ops teams are now getting documentation and information that goes along with each release into their environment saying, yes, I have done my diligence. I'm not going to break your sandbox. Does anybody know operations teams that get personally attached to their hardware? No, not so much? Well, sometimes they can, and they treat it like their own sandbox. And so now there's a two-way trust going on here. It's not just a network term between the development teams and the operations teams saying, I will do what I can to not break your environment. And the operations team is, I know what kind of service I have to provide a secure environment for your software. So those are some of the things that you have to watch out for the further along in the maturation process you go. But now, phase 4, we are going strong. If you have gotten to this part, you're now building bridges. You're not just swinging on ropes anymore. You can just walk across the bridge. You have the capability and the tools in place to look ahead and see where you need to put in more work, or the vulnerabilities, the pitfalls are more apparent to you the higher you go in the level. And look, ding, we just leveled up. At the end of phase 4, we are at 2s and 3s in some parts of the organization. Across the software development lifecycle, everybody is benefiting at this point. So the whole program is working together to build securely and, most importantly, to verify aggressively. Now, because of the work that's been done on construction, you have verification going on at every level of the software deployment process. Development into the security requirements are being built in through governance. They're being built in to the code in the construction part. And then verification has now built up a test suite of use cases or test cases for security requirements. And you're also starting EH, this is interesting, environment hardening. The operations team is now getting to the point where they have some real understanding of where they're vulnerable, and they have gone to lengths to fix it. So, which takes us into some of the things that you can run into as a problem.
Right. So kind of as one of these last few pitfalls that you can run into, and by hole I kind of just mean someplace you can get stuck. But Ron Ross was talking about compliance not being security, and it's a source of dismay in the security community across the board that compliance is not security. You are getting the point at policy and compliance level 3 where the organization does see compliance as more of an issue or a factor across the board, and so it can get to a point where management is saying, hey, we're not complying with our own policies, and and they can get stuck. So to be perfectly honest, TEA is definitely not here yet. Okay, but this is a potential problem that we can run into as we go. And listen, we're also not here either. We haven't reached maturity Shangri-La. I don't know if anybody has. Maybe some of you guys have in this room, since you're working on some maturity models. But there really is a place, I think, that we're headed. That's a more mature place. Really an area of software assurance. And I tell you how it feels, but we haven't gotten there yet. So.
I just wanted to say, before I was saying about the timeline thing, I think what you guys are talking about, or at least what I'm hearing, and I absolutely have experience and agree with, is that you guys are presenting this in a short amount of time, and this 0 to 3, but the reality is this can take some serious time, and don't expect, immediate change overnight, stick with it, and, plan, the word what the saying is plan your work and work your plan, and stick with what you're doing.
Yeah, I really think that is the key message. I started with that kind of in the treasurer's area, and I'm going to end with that. And I'm glad you helped me. That really having that plan and having that roadmap, having that direction where you're headed, that's the powerful thing here with this maturity model. I don't know about you guys. I'm the kind of person that doesn't like to begin with a blank page. If I've got a blank page, I got block. I can't do anything. Okay. opensamm helps the person like me because I have a layout. I have something I can work. Oh, good, I got a task. I can do tasks, task-oriented person. I can step back and do strategy too, but opensamm to some extent has done a lot of that for me, okay? I can review the strategy, I can tweak the strategy, right? I can modify it, but I've got some of the beginnings of that strategy. I know where I'm headed, and I can just work it.
When you created the roadmap, were there any objectives or activities that you decided what to do, or did you think, or NA or something like that? Because I know when we looked through it, like one of the higher ones was talking about using industry cost analysis to determine whether or not it's worth implementing a certain control or not. And I'm like, I don't think we're ever going to reach that level of maturity. So we just mark it as NA for the time being.
Got it. We did. So the way that I'm approaching it is to lay out each of the maturity levels for our direction, and to really just begin in the first few phases and work through that. And if we come to a point where it is impractical to move forward and we don't have an alternative that's reasonable, because I might argue there may be a way to modify that requirement to be reasonable for your organization. We're a state agency, so yeah, something like that doesn't necessarily make perfect sense. But if you can't find an alternative, it may make sense to strike it.
Well,
but
we also looked at another way, because at Rackspace, we're kind of a different beast. It's not as formalized and rigid and stuff. And some of the levels of maturity would just be impractical for our corporate culture to get that mature. And so, that's one thing that I like about opensamm is it's so variable in all the different sections that you can kind of say, well, we're going to put more emphasis on requirements and less on environment hardening or whatever.
I think that's an excellent point, and we didn't really point it out when we showed that roadmap template that we're using, but we didn't get to that roadmap template doesn't have us at level 3 in every area. It definitely does not, okay? And that's a very good point, Kevin, that it may not be reasonable for your organization to even get past level 2 in most areas. Level 3 may not make much sense. For whatever reason, because again, you're not modifying opensamm standard. We're not tweaking and saying, oh no, it's the success criteria are different or this or that. It's like if you modify opensamm, it's not opensamm anymore, and that's okay. But so use something that works for you, but if it doesn't make sense to go beyond a maturity level, then don't. Make your own roadmap.
Right. When I've looked at it, I have not. But I've read it, about it. Usually, I can look at a question and say, how can I abstract the goal behind this thing and recreate something that does make sense?
And one of the nice things about the opensamm framework is that at each maturity level for each discipline, it has a set of activities that you should be engaging in. It doesn't tell you how you have to do those, but those are also really good ideas of what you can do, how to start your abstraction. Where can I take this and where can I apply it? Even if I'm not going to go full on to a level 3, there are some of the things in that process that I can apply and still get benefit without fully going down that to the maturation process.
AJ, did you have a question?
I was just going to make a comment as a public engineer. I would keep that question in there and continue to answer NA for as long as possible because you don't know what happened.
Sure.
Management may change, you might change direction and decide you want to go down that path, then you can start making.
Yeah. And again, as the decision across the organization needs to be clear. No, we're not addressing this right now. That's or it's not applicable. That's a fine answer. Cool.
Well, folks, it is 10 before the hour, and we'd like to thank you both all very, very much for coming to listen to our presentation.
Yeah, thank you. On time? Very good. Thanks. Let me, before you disconnect. Okay.
I didn't realize
Let me,
we just started this in the last night.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, so now